Set screws on beauty shears, grooming shears, come in 3 different types. And we're going to look at them from a sharpener's point of view and from a hairstylist point of view. I'm Bonnie Megowan. I do a lot of videos for sharpeners. I also have another channel called Love to Cut, and you may want to subscribe to that if you're a sharpener, because I'm going to upload little outbits of this video to that channel, and those will be appropriate for you to share with your hairstylists and your groomers if you're trying to explain to them how to adjust the screw on their shears. I've had some videos on this in the past. They've had a lot of views, but they're quite old, they're dated, and I think I can do a little bit better today. But I have a lot of videos. Make sure you subscribe, go to my channel, join us on our Sharpeners Jam group in Facebook, and let's take a look at these types of screws. We're going to start with the regular screw, the most common one out there. Hey stylist, it's important that you keep your shears in the right tension. If you don't have the right tension, then you're going to cause problems with your hand. You're going to have hair bend or fold instead of cut, where you're using more pressure, and you can also dull out your shears quicker. So it's really important that you know how to correctly adjust your screws. And there are 3 basic screw types, and this time we're going to talk about the regular screw. If this type of screw is on your shears, then you need to watch this video. These shears are the ones I want to talk about. The slots in the different shears are different sizes. So one screwdriver may not fit for them all. If you get one too small, it's not going to work well. If it's too big, it won't go in here. So find a screwdriver that fits your shears. Now, what if you have to have them adjusted right then, and you don't have a screwdriver there? Sometimes a quarter, sometimes a dime, and you can just check it, and these will adjust your shears for you. Now, why would you have an emergency time when you need to adjust your screw? Maybe your screw is loosened up, and we're going to talk about this screw on this shear first. This particular shear is too loose. Now, why would you not want your shear this loose? Number one, you actually have to use more pressure on your hand, and you're going to cause more carpal tunnel problems if you're using a shear that's too loose, because you have to use a crab grip. You see how I'm twisting my fingers to make it close correctly? Because if you don't, here's what's going to happen. I cut the hair and it's just going to fold. To make it cut, I would have to do a crab grip to make the blades come together. So if you're noticing your shears are folding the hair instead of cutting, you're having to use more pressure, check your adjustment. If it's this loose, it's time to adjust them. Now you may look at this shear, and if you flip it over, it looks like you've got a screw on both sides. This is what we call a split screw. The screw is really one piece, but there's like a little split in the stem. Here's a picture of what it looks like. Now, if you turn it this way, you're going to use a regular screwdriver, but if you turn it around, it looks like a teeny tiny screw here. So all you would need to do on this shear is tighten it with a screwdriver. I like to tighten it with it open and a finger in the back here, and it's righty-tighty, or clockwise to tighten your screw. Do it a little bit and check it. That's still way too loose. A little bit more, check it. I tell people to turn it just like a half a turn and then check it. Now that might be permissible. I would like to see a little bit tighter than that because they tend to loosen up. When you think you have it tight enough, the trick is to open it all the way open. And I'm going to wiggle this handle and I'm going to wiggle this handle. So I'm doing this with a little bit of pressure, and it loosens up. And then I might want to give it a little bit of a turn tighter. Now the correct adjustment should be somewhere between here and here. A lot of times people want to just feel it in their hands and see how this feels. And so you can customize the adjustment to your hand, but it has to at least catch itself a little bit before it comes down if you like them loose. Most people will prefer them where they're a little bit tighter and they're staying up here. Now that was one shear. Let me show you this from. It's the ultra light. It's super, super, super light. This one, if I adjusted it like the other shear, it would be too loose because it doesn't have the weight of the handle to pull it down. So this one, the adjustment needs to be all the way up. So just be aware of the weight of the shear in your adjustment and what feels right in your hand. Of course, I would not put in my left hand. So you can kind of flick it and see what feels good as far as the pressure of your hand. This is a Jaguar white line. It has like a little black nut on the back and a regular screw on the front. This one you can actually use a quarter will fit in there if you don't have a screwdriver because it has a wider slot. Now on this one, because it's a heavier shear, you may want to change the adjustment where it's a little bit looser than you would that from shear. And you can feel it in your hand if that should easily flick up with your thumb and not fall all the way down. And once again, just like that original shear, when you get it set, you want to wiggle it. This adjustment that you see on the Jaguar is the actual adjustment coming from the factory. You see it almost touches, but not all the way. And this is straight out of the box from the factory in Germany. This one is the from shear. And once again, it's straight out of the box, hasn't been touched, and it's adjusted tight like this. Different shears will have different adjustments depending on the preferences of the manufacturer. In general, if you don't know what the adjustment is from the manufacturer, you want to have something a little bit tighter than this, where it's going to drop right about there, because the screw will loosen up as you use them, and you don't want to have to stop and adjust them. If you're having to adjust your screw all the time on your shears, that's usually a manufacturer's defect, and I would go back to whoever you bought your shears from and see if that's covered under warranty and see if they can correct it. As a stylist, I would not take these screws out. There are pieces in here, there are little washers, there's on some of these are nuts that are on the back that are very difficult to put on. And if you need to clean underneath them, you can use dental floss, you can use like a little brush, but don't back them out to clean them. Just adjust them. Don't get any moisture or water underneath there. Oil is the only thing you're going to put underneath here. So I hope that's helpful to all of you stylists on how to not have a loose screw on your flat, regular type of screws shears. As I said, you're more likely to see these on older shears, on German scissors, and on beveled edge, even if they're not made in Germany, shears that are influenced by the German style of shears. Sharpeners, I told you I'd give you a little bit more information beyond what I'm giving the stylist. What you need to be aware of, especially, are these with a split screw. When you take them out, sometimes that split gets mashed together. You can very carefully push it apart to open it up. You can use Teflon tape. My favorite product, if you can't get the screw to hold, is the VC3. Follow the directions carefully. I've got a YouTube on how to use this product. But the key on these is you want to adjust it, check it, adjust it, and check it, because if it's a split screw, if you push it in too far, you tend to mash that split in the back. So you don't want to over tighten it like I did in the video and then loosen it out if you can avoid it. Another danger on these screws for sharpeners is the ones that have some type of a nut on the back. And you need to know that you can get that part and replace it if you happen to have them lose it or it breaks or something. So if you can sharpen it without taking them apart, and many of these type of shears have a very low hollow and basically no ride line, then I would, by all means, I would sharpen them without disassembling them if you can. So those are just some additional information for sharpeners. The other thing I wanted to let sharpeners know, and this is something stylists would necessarily care about, but I did do some studies on the amount of pressure your hand has depending on the adjustment of your shears, and you can tell them without any kind of hesitation that if that screw is too loose, they're actually having to use more pressure on their hands. Not to mention, a screw that's too loose will cause the hair to fold. They have to use more pressure on their hand, and it will dull out the edges faster, so they'll be needing to pay you more. So explain to your stylist about keeping their screw adjusted correctly, and you can send them these little videos if you need to put them on your website or whatever so they can watch this. So we're going to go on to the next screw, which is the thumb nut screw. Stylists, this is a second part in my video on how to correctly adjust the tension on the pivot screw on your shears. Now, if you have this type of screw on your shears, this is called a thumb nut screw. It might have a few different varieties, as you see here, and we're going to talk about how to correctly adjust the tension. Because if the tension's wrong, your shears can go dull faster, you can work your hand harder, or the hair will just flip and fold if you have the wrong tension on your shears. Thumb nut screws are the easiest of all the different types of shears to adjust the screw. Some of these will be very decorative, some might be very plain, some will be like more of a cap, and other ones will be more like a nut. But all of these can be adjusted easily with your hands in most cases. They'll all be raised up, which some hairstylists don't like the large nut. This is the correct adjustment on this shear. You see the finger rest is down. I drop this side and it moves, but it doesn't fall all the way down. Now, if I were to open it up, and I recommend this after you've adjusted your shear, and wiggle the handles. Now you have to do it all the way open. If you do it with it partly closed, you can nick the two sides. So with it all the way open, I'm wiggling it and it will loosen up. This one didn't loosen up too much, but you want to wiggle it until it keeps its adjustment. So this one is adjusted correctly. If it were loose, and I'm clicking it about 3 or 4 more clicks so it goes loose like this. If this were loose, let me show you what happens. When I go to cut hair, you see the hair folds instead of cutting. So I could make it cut, but I would have to use a crab grip. Can you see that? That's going to hurt my hand. It's going to cause all kinds of problems. Also, those blades aren't designed to come across each other like that, and your shears are going to dull out faster. So you want to always check your adjustment. I suggest at the end of the day, turn that screw and adjust it to where you feel like it's right. And remember, it's clockwise. And that's might be a little bit on the tight side, but if that feels good to you, wiggle it. You can also put it in your hand, and it should be able to kind of bounce off your thumb. That feels about right to you. Different brands of shears will have different suggested adjustments, but in general, I think if you adjust your shears where they'll close a little bit from here to here, any in that area, that would feel most comfortable for you and give you the nicest cut. Now, there are all kinds of pieces underneath these screws that if you start taking these apart to clean them, it's very difficult to put them back. It's easy to lose them. You can cause all kinds of problems. So my suggestion is, if you need to clean underneath them, you can use some dental floss. You can use like a little brush, toothbrush, or whatever, but don't take this screw out. Don't loosen it too much. And the other thing, you don't ever want to put any kind of moisture in here, no barbicide. This should just be oil underneath this pivot because it can rust. It can rust. If your nut is stuck and you can't turn it with your fingers, you can always get a little pair of pliers and gives you a little bit better grip so you can turn it. Some of their screws are not up as high and they're a little bit more difficult to get a hold of with your fingers. So on those cases, what I use and what you can use is a little pair of pliers. So I hope that was helpful in knowing how to adjust your typical thumb nut screw. Now, sharpeners. There's other things that you need to know about that I'm not getting into the details with a stylist. These types of screws will have one of 3 types of clicker plates. They're called springs, metal washers. Different companies call them different things. I call them clicker plates because they click when you turn them. And that's nomenclature we've come up with at Bonika Shears, and I think a lot of other people are using that. This type here, I call that a leaf clicker plate. And we sell those parts and they come in various sizes, and those sometimes will crack and you have to replace them. There'll also be a washer back underneath this back here. But that's a leaf type clicker plate. And when the thumb screws first came out, pretty much all of them had this type of plate to them. Hair gets stuck underneath that. It's not as popular as it used to be. But they are pretty. Now, one that is less common is this one, which is on an old Bonika silk shear. And this is what we call an external clicker plate. Let me show you why I call it that. I'm going to take this apart. Notice I put my finger underneath it when I take it apart. Can you see the clicker plate underneath here? Now, the tricky part about this is this has like a little nipple or nose that must go down in that hole here. If it doesn't go in that hole, and a lot of times you'll put it together, you'll have it positioned right, and then when you put your nut on it, it slides. And the way you know it has moved is if it doesn't click when you're turning it. So that has to go down, and then on the nut, do you see it has like little teeth there? That has to connect with the teeth or nipples or noses or whatever you want to call it, sticking up. And can you hear it click? Our air conditioner's running here, so you may not be able to hear it, and it's just slipped on me. So this is a good example. Let me let you see this. Can you see that little nipple? It's slipped. And I can tell it slipped because I can't get a good adjustment and it doesn't click when I turn it. So I have to loosen it up and push that around till that little nipple falls in that hole. And now it's clicking. See if you can hear it click. And you click it until you've got about the right adjustment. And as a sharpener, I always give it back on the tight side, usually right about here where it moves a little bit, because as they use it, they loosen up. There are some manufacturers that say that they want their shears all the way adjusted where they don't move at all. They'll say take them where they move. You see how that's just loosening up on me, just playing with it here. So it's good to take a few minutes and play with it a little bit, but a lot of manufacturers will say this is where they want the adjustment to be. And I don't have anything wrong with that. That probably is the best adjustment for many, many shears. However, when the stylist gets them, if they feel too tight, what they do to loosen them, they crank it all the way down. They won't do it like one click, which would be the correct way to do that. Oh, I'm having some real issues here. And this is a good example of how you have to kind of play with it a little bit. Click, click. That looks about right. Give it a wiggle. And then after I oil it, I check it again. But that's the external clicker plate. The internal clicker plate. The internal clicker plates are what I'm finding are more common. And these are down inside a little well inside here. It's similar to the other one, but the trick on these little internal clicker plates is that you have to have the nipple up or the nose up so that it can engage in the screw. Let me take one of these apart for you to see. This is one that sometimes you have to get pliers to get it because it's not a kind of hard to grab it. I'm getting it here. Now when you take this off, you'll see there's like little teeth underneath here. And down in the hole, in the well, usually it's brass colored, there's a little clicker plate. You see that in there? Yeah, that's a good picture of it. And that little nipple, that little nose has to be up. And there are different sizes of these little internal clicker plates, and you need to make sure you have a selection of them, because this little thing, if you miss it and it flies off or it breaks, you'll see that too. You're going to have to replace it. The other thing that you're going to find that happens with this, quite common, and as many years as I've been sharpening, I'll put it back together, and when I start turning this, I won't feel or hear the click. Listen to the clicking. Hear it? If you don't hear that click, you probably have that internal clicker plate upside down. And once again, it's adjust, check them. When you think you have it right, wiggle it all the way open and check it. Oil it, check it again. You may even want to play with it a little bit and see if it loosens up. But that's how to do the thumb screw. If you have stylists with this type of screw, go to our Love to Cut, put some of those videos up so they can understand about how to adjust their screw. Stylists, what's a UFO screw and how do you set the tension? Let's look at this one. It's important that you have the right tool. That's the key to setting the correct tension on the UFO screw. Sometimes called the tamper resistant screw, has a number of different names, but UFO is the easiest to remember. So let's talk about how to correctly adjust this screw. The most mystifying of all the pivot screws on shears is the notorious UFO screw. If you have one of these types of shears and you need to adjust the pivot, you better have the tool. You might be able to use needle-nosed pliers, you might be able to use tweezers, you might be able to go to the hardware store and get something called a spanner bit. But in general, you need the tool that came from the manufacturer for your shears, because these come in a variety of styles, and if you can't adjust your screw on your shears, you've got a problem. So let's look at the different types of UFO screws and see if that is what is on your shears. So if your shears have 2 slots, sometimes it's 4 slots, but it's not like a Phillips head, it's not like a regular screw, it's not a thumb nut screw, but it has slots to put a tool in. This is what we call a UFO screw. And the size of the slots, the space between them will vary from one shear to the other. So one tool does not fit all. The most common tools you'll see, and very often you should get these that'll fit your shears when you purchase your shears. Some will have just like one little tool. Some will have several. Some might have 2. One of these will not fit every UFO shear. This is the most universal style if you've got this one. You can usually go back and buy them from your shear manufacturer. We sell these different styles on our website, but this should have been given to you when you bought your shears. If you didn't get the tool, you need to ask for it. Now, the way to adjust these is you find the ones that fit in the slots. And on this one, here it is. And I don't know, I think that one fits better. And you should hear it click, because most of them have what we call an internal clicker plate. The Jaguar shears that have this type of screw have a very special tool for them, and they won't click. They have a different type of mechanism inside. In general, most of your shears that have this type of screw that are coming from the Asian continent are going to have like a little clicker plate, we call it, inside, and you'll hear it click as you turn it. Now, why do you need to be able to adjust your screw? You're going to need to adjust your screw if it gets loose on you. Now, typically these screws have less problems with loosening up than the other types of screws on the market. So that's why you're seeing so many shears going to this. Also because they're flatter, they don't get caught in the hair, and they're harder for your customers to pick up and piddle with it and mess up your screw. Now this one, I've just loosened it up and it's too loose. Now you say, oh, what's looser? That means I don't have to work my hand as hard. That's not always so. Here's what's going to happen. If you cut with a screw that's loose, you see how it's folding the hair instead of cutting now. I can make it cut, but I have to do a crab grip and it's still not cutting at the tip. So if your screw is too loose, you're not going to get a good cut. You're going to have to work your hand harder. Plus, the blades are going to hit together wrong and you're going to have your shears sharpened more often. It's going to damage your shears. They're not designed that way. What you want to do is find whatever tool fits in the slots in your shears and feel it click. When you think you have the right adjustment, open it all the way up. If you do this, the two blades will nick each other. You want to open it all the way up and wiggle. And this hand's doing this, this hand is doing that, and wiggle it. And if it falls down and loosens up too much, then you want to tighten it again. Now, the other way you can check to see if they're adjusted right is just kind of flick them with your thumb. And how do they feel? They should have the right amount of tension where you don't have to overwork your hand, but you don't have to do a crab grip to make the blades come together. So you can customize the tension of the pivot to your style of cutting and to your hand. You don't want to take this out to clean them. You don't want to take it out for any purposes because there's all kinds of little pieces inside here that can get lost, that can break, that can go back in the wrong way. Leave that only to professional to take that screw out of your shears. Now, I want to show you a few other types of UFO screws you may come across. Some of these will have a decorative nut on the front. They're actually like a two-piece in here. And then on the back, you see the slots for the UFO. Sometimes the slots will be on the front of the shear. Sometimes they'll be on the back. This is a ball bearing screw, and you can see the little ball bearings in here. It'll have that instead of a washer. Not all the ones with a ball bearing screw will be visible like this one. I like this one because you can see the ball bearings. And then on the back, you've got the slots. So I hope that was helpful to you in knowing how to correctly adjust the pivot screw on your shears. My suggestion is at the end of the day, when you clean your shears and you oil them, double check your adjustment, and if you need to adjust it, go ahead. If you're having to adjust them all the time, that is probably a defect with your shears. It would be covered under most manufacturers. So go back to whoever you bought your shears from and tell them that you've got a loose screw and say it with a straight face. So I hope that was helpful to you. All right, sharpeners. Let's talk about UFO screws. We love them and hate them. Number one, we love them because they're less likely to loosen up with your hairstylist, so you have fewer callbacks and complaints about a loose screw. But we hate them because not one tool will fit all of them. A lot of sharpeners will buy spanner bits. Some will take screwdrivers and cut them out with Dremels and make their own tools. You're just going to have to get all the different type of UFO tools that you can possibly find and have them. Also, inside here are what we call internal clicker plates. And we saw that on the video with the thumb nuts. It's the same clicker plates. And they're going to go inside the well. And once again, you're going to need different sizes. And make sure the little nipple's up. When you take the top off of these screws, you'll see, once again, you'll see like little teeth. Now the exception to this is the Jaguar, the gold and the silver UFO tools. Those you really need to have the German Jaguar tool because the slots on them are teensy tiny. And it's a rubber gasket instead of an internal clicker plate that holds them together. So if you take them apart and that rubber breaks or it gets lost, they're very difficult to put back together. They have changed the style on the screw in recent years, so if you have an older shear, the new screw may not fit it that well. So just be really careful if you have Jaguar shears. Now it's two pieces that fit together, one into the other. The only thing that holds the tension is you have like a little rubber gasket on here. And you have a thicker washer on the back side and one of these little strange washers that goes under the head that has like a little rectangular hole that fits over here. So these kind of break the rules for the other UFO screws, but the little slots, you see them, they look like little teeny tiny snake eyes. Those are really difficult to use your typical UFO tool to take them apart. So you may need to have the actual tool from Germany. I've taken them apart using tweezers, little needle nose tweezers. You've got really pointy needle nose pliers. But in general, you may need to try to sharpen these without taking them apart. So I hope that was helpful. Go to Love to Cut. Subscribe to that channel as well, because I'll have videos that you can put on your website or send to your stylist to help them understand about taking care of their shears. And I'll have all these little clips on there. I made a lot of bloopers on this one as I was going through, and you might enjoy it, so stay around to the end. We're going to look at the 3 most common screws that come. This is not a porno video. Let me start over again. Oh dear.